Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for being here. All right, let's start. We're going to get to know our guests a little bit more than you might think you already do. And I'd like to start with you, Gloria. Let's talk about your feminist awakening. I know these things don't happen all like dramatic like they do on TV, where you wake up one day and you say, aha, I must change the world. But I did read in one of your essays in this book about called Campaigning, about your work on the McGovern campaign, and how you ran into this sort of brick wall where no broads were allowed. Can you imagine? And at that point, you decided that women needed to speak up or change would never happen. So can you take us back into that moment?
I should take you back before that moment, because
Yes.
there was a long time in which I still loved campaigning, because there's a kind of instant democracy to the campaigns itself. People wander in off the street, and important people do small things and not important people do big things, and I just loved campaigns, but for good candidates, but
Right, let's be clear.
but I was still in the stage, which I hope no one in this audience is, that I realized that my suggestions would be taken more seriously if they were said by someone else. So I would be sitting there, giving my suggestions to the man next to me, or writing things out, or whatever it was. And I think the McGovern campaign, which I don't know how many people here remember the Chicago Democratic Convention, which was a watershed moment for the anti-Vietnam War movement, and there were riots in the streets and all of that. And McGovern, we were trying to break the first ballot victory that McCarthy couldn't, so McGovern was, and I just had enough, so that when I was supposed to go to a meeting and one of his top advisors said no broads, I had it. I had just had it, okay? So there are moments like that for all of us, I'm sure. The big moment for me was also going to an abortion hearing as a reporter, and hearing women stand up and tell the truth about the experience of a then illegal procedure, and realizing if 1 in 3 of us has needed this at some time in our lives, why is it, so there are, I think, moments of revelation that get you off your ass and into the revolution and say, this is just wrong.
Thank you. Is everyone ready to get off their ass? That's the other goal for tonight when you leave. So Favianna, for you, what was your, did you have a moment where you felt like, I am in touch with my power?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll share a little bit about my growing up. I'm the daughter of immigrants. I'm first-generation American. And I grew up, thank you. I grew up in East Oakland in the era... I grew up in East Oakland when it was a black and brown city, and when it was actually one of the most dangerous cities to live in. It was the era of crack cocaine, and my parents, they just wanted me to get, straight A's and go get an education, because they were both holding down 2 to 3 jobs, and they didn't have a high school education or college education, and so education was always a way for me to find my power. But it was like, Favi, you got to go to school, get straight A's. That's why we came to this country, and keep your legs closed. Yes, that was just the message I consistently got. And so when I went to college, UC Berkeley, I was just, and I lived in a co-ed Chicano co-op. I just, I was like, wow. And I had gotten a full ride to UC Berkeley. I got a scholarship by Girls Inc., which was a young women's organization that helped me really find my voice. So I had learned about sex education, and that was all available to me. But in my own home, my culture was very much about pain-oriented narratives around like, close your legs, don't get pregnant. And so I didn't have the tools to navigate when I was finally able to, not be monitored by my parents. And so I got pregnant in my 3rd year in college. And when I told my partner at the time, he disappeared, and I didn't see him again. And I was alone, and I had an abortion alone, and I actually was, it was thanks to Planned Parenthood that I was able to get an abortion. Thank you. But it took me 10 years to come out of the closet with my story, and I really want to emphasize that although, as a woman of color, I've always grown up around powerful women of color, but the narratives around the agency around our bodies are still so highly stigmatized. And so for me, when I was able to share as a Latina, that's a very loaded thing for a Latina to come out. I was one of the first Latinas who came out publicly, and Cosmo for Latinas actually covered my story. But I really talked about the power it takes for us to share our stories and to shed the shame. And when I realized just how many other Latinas began to come out, that was a moment when I just really felt in my power, because when you release shame, it's a moment to really just say, we don't need your patriarchal views. I want my body's freedom.
Thank you for sharing that story, and thank you for telling us yours. I mean, this naturally leads to the question of who gets to decide the narrative, and who gets to decide what's okay and what's not okay. And I know that, that's been your life's work. I know that you're working, Favianna, in the entertainment business, trying to change who's actually in charge of telling those stories. So maybe we could spend a little bit of time about the power of storytelling for good and evil, and how we just can keep getting further to the side of good. Could you talk about the work that you're doing with 50/50 by 2020?
Absolutely, and I'm an artist, and so I was always very aware. Growing up in the '80s, I was like watching 16 Candles and Pretty in Pink, and I'm like, this is. Now I see it. There was no consent. A lot of the culture projected back to us, whether it was music or film or even the ads we see, don't reflect our values, and they actually they shape our imagination. And if we begin to understand that since the 80s, Reagan disseminated our artistic infrastructure in this country, and that men run our entire cultural infrastructure in this country. I mean, they run it 80 to 85% of powerful positions in music, film, television, visual arts, theater, dance, gaming is by white men. And so they're shaping the way we interact with the world. And I think, we have to ask ourselves, who's approving those rape scenes in all the TV shows? Who's filming them? Who's writing those into scripts? And similarly, who's approving these advertisements that we see? That's all culture, and culture shapes politics. People vote the way they can imagine possibilities, and so if we can change culture, we can change laws. And I think that currently, the Gorilla Girl said this, 85% of the work, even on museum walls, is by men, and so what's held up as the standard is a men's point of view. And television and film is the worst. It's the most unequal space, and working with women in Time's Up, when you see that despite having power and fame, that women are in very unsafe workplaces, and that their violence and sexual harassment and abuse is so normalized. That's the culture we're exporting. That the film industry is one of the United States' largest cultural contributions to the world. And so if men are running that town, and sexual exploitation and abuse and just the downgrading of women and queer folks and people of color is normalized, then that's how people are going to think. And so part of what is happening now, that the conversation on sexual harassment allowed the artists, because it's not just actors, it's musicians, it's curators who are finally speaking out. It allowed artists to say, it starts with sexual harassment, but it's actually an issue of equity, and you got to get out the way. It's time for us to get our power back. And I think we're in such a critical moment right now, because because of Weinstein, Cosby, I mean, Larry Nassar, there's these giants that are tumbling, but we have to be able to replace it. We have to be able to say, okay, not your way, it's our way. And so that's the kind of organizing that I'm involved in. And there's I really want to salute, especially the leadership of Black women like, Ava DuVernay and people like Shonda Rhimes and that who are actually saying, we don't need your systems. We actually don't even need your approval. I mean, people like Issa Rae who are saying, I'm not writing my show for a white audience. I'm writing a show for a Black audience, a women of color audience. And I think that it's a very transformative moment because, again, if we can change culture, I think we can change people's imaginations.
Thank you. I'm sure you have something to say about that.
Yes.
Well, I'm just sitting here thinking that we both started with talking about our bodies.
Yes.
And the truth is that if we did not have wombs, we would be fine, okay? It is all about controlling reproduction. That is the first step in every hierarchy and it redoubles if there is racism, because then you have to control reproduction even more to keep the races separate, or in India, the castes separate, or classes separate. And I do think we need to know that deeply, because otherwise we don't understand. We say to each other, why are we still fighting this battle, right? Without understanding that it is the basic battle, that controlling our own physical selves, especially for women, but for men too, is the first step in any democracy. Either we decide what happens to our bodies, we can use our own voices, or there is no democracy after that.
When you started Ms. Magazine, and okay, shout out for Ms. Magazine, yes. I love it. You were kind of made fun of in a way. Like there were. I saw a documentary about you on HBO where they showed the male newscaster saying, "Oh, it's going to last 1 or 2 issues. These women don't know what they're talking about. These are so frivolous," and they tried to use their power to belittle the important topics that you were bringing up, that women wanted to read about and that you wanted to write about. Can you talk about how that all went down and how you handled that criticism?
Well, there was no, and I must say there is still, the magazines, national, easily available magazines for women are not owned, controlled, and edited by women even now. And then it was absolutely, a very strange idea. Women's magazines were and still are to a large extent, because if they're controlled by advertising, they're about fashion and beauty and cooking and pleasing and so on. So the idea that we were going to start what we thought of as a way of making revolution, not hamburgers, as Flo Kennedy always said, or was very, very, very ridiculed. And the only reason that it worked was because of people like you in the audience. We got New York Magazine, which I had also been one of the people helping to start and so on. So they printed in New York Magazine a sample of Ms. Magazine, and also then allowed us to, or made it possible for us to do a preview issue. And we were so afraid that we were going to disgrace the entire women's movement that though it came out in January, we cover dated it spring, because we thought it might just lie there like a lox on the newsstand. But,
it's April.
But what actually happened was that as all the authors in it spread out, because we didn't have any money for publicity, I came here to San Francisco and I was on some morning show. It had been out about 8 days, And someone called after the show and said, you know, we can't find it on the newsstands. And so I called home and I said, it never got here, it didn't get distributed. And it turned out it had sold out in 8 days.
Wow.
So it was totally created by you, by readers. We were always informed by your letters and responses. We realized women were waiting till later to have first babies, and we would write about that. We were, you know, all kinds of things, because we read our letters. And we actually discovered later on that it was more financially viable without advertising than with. Because we buy paperback books, right, as we know, right? Okay, right. So why not magazines? And I say that because I still think the influence of advertising is sinister in a way that we don't quite look at. I mean, we would not have Trump as a, you know, well-known name if he hadn't had a show that was like watching a roadside accident, you know, but because it got a lot of eyeballs, a lot of numbers of viewers, then it gave him power. It wasn't about the content, it wasn't about the accuracy, it was about the sheer number of viewers. And as long as advertisers are only looking at numbers, not accuracy, not quality, not, you know, it will influence our media in a very, very unfortunate way. So the more we can do online, the more we can subsidize our own media, the more, however it is, the better. The more we will avoid the influence of just numbers are everything.
Yeah. I believe that's what got us in trouble at this last election. And it wasn't just the reality show. It was the real reality show. And the media wanting to make the headlines. I mean, they admitted that, you know, and they were able to sell more.
Yeah, but remember, he still lost by 6 million votes.
Yeah.
Three for Hillary, 3 for other candidates. So, you know, we have to get rid of the Electoral College.
Yes.
The part of our being...
Absolutely.
Which, remember, was only the creation of the slave states in the first place.
That's right. That's right.
Say more about that.
Well, you know, those representatives of slave states obviously had less population, and they were trying to figure out, you know, how they would have more power. And even though every state has 2 senators, even tiny states, so you would think that that would balance it out. No, the Electoral College was added to that. And we, as you all know, here can get rid of it not only by a constitutional amendment, which takes too long, but also by state legislatures saying, we will give our electoral votes to the candidate who wins the majority. And at a certain point then, the Electoral College becomes a moot point, right? And that's what we're doing, right?
I mean, one of the things that I want to talk about tonight is all the missed history that we don't learn in school. And things like that are not necessarily coming up in the classroom. I mean, especially teachers have to cover, you know, 2,000 years of history in 12 weeks. It's sometimes difficult to get to all the details. But there are things that you write about that had we known about matriarchies from the past, or the way that power was distributed more evenly in different times, that we would have more to learn from, to apply now. So I don't know if anyone here is a history buff, but I'm curious about things that I was never taught, because we have this very simplified narrative that is reinforced in the media and in the culture and entertainment.
Well, you know, in the Museum of the American Indian in Washington, which is kind of a great place because everything is round, there are no straight lines and so on. Somewhere in the beginning it says there are 2 things, history and the past, and they are not the same.
Wow.
So you brought up the word power. And language is something that you talk about in this book, and the use of language. And power is one of those words, that there's a distinction between how, let's just generalize, men and women use the word power, and that there's a difference between power over and power with. And I'm wondering, does that speak to you, Favianna, in terms of what you're trying to go for?
Yeah, totally. And actually, I've been thinking about just what you said earlier, that our conversation started with the body. And we have to understand that there was entire groups of people who were exploited for their bodies, that our bodies in service, whether it was through slavery or through things like, the Chinese who were forced to build the railroads, that there have been oppressed people whose bodies were put in service of a agenda of a white man. And I think that to really take it back, that it's about fundamentally our ability to be in our bodies and to be free. I mean, even my family, my two parents, had to work they worked my entire childhood because of this idea that somehow immigrants are just seen in this hyper-productive way and they can't be full human beings. And so when I think about what it means to grow up in a culture of domination versus a culture of partnership, it's all around us. I mean, we have a culture of domination with the planet. We are living in times where we are relying on an extractive economy, which extracts from the earth, it extracts from people, it extracts from animals, it extracts from basically bodies, including the nature, which is also a body. I mean, we're connected to nature, and animals are definitely bodies. But that there's bodies who are treated better than others, and there's bodies who benefit from the extractive economy. So I really believe that part of what needs to happen is that we need a shift towards a regenerative way of being, which is in partnership, and that's when we move away from the things that are exploitative to other creatures or to the planet or to people. Especially women around the world, but it's not just women. It's actually it's people of color, it's immigrants, it's trans people, it's people with disabilities who are sort of put on the bottom in service to a world of domination. And I think it's very useful for us to think about it in that way, domination versus partnerships, because it allows us to imagine: are we building economies that are regenerative and that celebrate partnership, which to me is a very it's a very feminist way of looking at the world, which is to regenerate, right? Because you put into the cycle of life and life gives back. So I love that concept, that we can move towards partnership, right, and co-creation versus domination.
For a fundraiser, we were all asked to try to put what we wanted on a bracelet, like in beads, like a baby bracelet, you spell out some of it, right? So the shortest way I could think of saying what we want, it had Imagine, like John Lennon, Imagine, right? And then you were supposed to put, so I said, we are linked, not ranked. And that, is, I think, totally what we are both saying. Yeah.
So I hope this segue makes sense to other people. This is making me think about how we can all work together towards a common goal, and that it's not about necessarily my point of view or your point of view. It's how can we bring our various points of view together to make a difference in the world. And there's this term that we have been coming to grips with, I guess is the way I can think about saying it, that tries to encapsulate different experiences and different oppressions layered on top of other oppressions, and it's intersectionality. But I think it's a word that people don't necessarily understand the meaning of truly. That's my own personal anecdotal experience. I've asked many people, what does it mean to you? And I've gotten a different answer every time. So I'm going to ask you both that question. And then I want to talk about some more history.
Yes.
So
I love
Favianna.
that question.
Yeah.
That's my favorite question, actually. So, intersectional feminism, which is a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. She's a black professor at UCLA. And what intersectionality means to me is that we unite on those who have been sidelined by our current worldview, right? Our current economic global system, those who have been sidelined, that we find unity in building a world that works for all of us. And it's not just humans. I really believe that intersectionality includes nature, it includes creatures, because we are a part of nature. And I think that part of what patriarchy has done is that it's made us feel that as humans we are somehow superior, but we are completely reliant on the natural world. And so when I think of intersectionality, I see it as us understanding that the same forces that are extracting oil and engaging in land grabs and pushing for forced migration are the same people who are designing our laws around reproductive injustice. They're the same powers that are incarcerating black and brown people and immigrant families, and that in reality our enemy is the white male, hetero, patriarchal, ableist culture that has driven really, and it's a colonial mindset that has really shaped our current worldview. And so I love also the concept of worldview because it's that we can interact with the world in a different way, that we can understand that we all belong, there's enough for all of us, and that we have to create systems where we can all thrive, including, you know, creatures and the planet. So I would say that to me is the essence of intersectionality, is the unification against the domination agenda that has shaped our lives.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Yeah. That is the first time I've ever heard that definition. See what I mean? Gloria, what about, how do you define intersectionality?
No, I totally agree with everything you just said, and I would just like to add that I am comforted by the fact that the way we live now, the hierarchical way, the either-or way, everything, it was not always the case on this land where we are.
That's right.
Right? Mm-hmm. That before Europeans showed up, coming from the newly patriarchal colonial world, yes. And so there were many, many nations on our continent, and they, for the most part, I'm not a scholar here, but Cherokee and a lot of the other languages did not have gender, right. Did not have he and she. People were people. What a concept, right? Their idea of social organization was the circle, not the pyramid. Right. You were supposed to plan for 7 generations forward. How would your action now work for 7 generations forward? Right. We recognized to some extent the importance of these cultures because it was the 7 nations of the Iroquois Confederacy, the Haudenosaunee, that was the model for our Constitution. That is still the oldest continuous democracy in the whole world. So in Europe, they had monarchs and so on, and right. Okay. So somehow it helps me to know that. Because how they get to us, I think, is to say that it's impossible, it's human nature to have a hierarchy, right, which is utter bullshit. It is not. And we learn history too much, beginning with Columbus. Is that still going on?
Yes.
I wrote to the Smithsonian to get Columbus's letters. He was such a shit. I can't begin to tell.
What did he write?
No, I mean, he said, he talks about how these people here welcomed and fed them and so on, and then he kills people, and he can't understand why women don't go along with being captured as sex slaves for his crew. Yeah. I mean, right. And he was such a bad navigator that he thought to his dying day that he was in India. Right. Yeah. So if we just started history when people started, why not?
Right.
Why start when Columbus? You know, it is so political, the teaching of history, and I know there are many people, and you and everybody in this audience who's changing that, but I still think that we feel that the current system is somehow, I don't know, I feel very heartened to know it wasn't always this way.
I totally agree, and I actually think that this is why culture is so powerful, because ideas get normalized in culture, and so we grow up thinking that this world that we're in is normal, but there's nothing like normal about how we're extracting like dinosaurs from the earth. A lot of the ways that we interact are actually not normal. They're designed. And so I think it's so crucial for us to, and the way that people maintain power is through culture, is what you teach, what you expose people, and what you define as normal. You know, when I was growing up, and I would say that I wanted to be an artist, the number one thing my teachers taught me about was Picasso, and Picasso was an abuser, you know, and so I think that we have to know that when we are able to understand that there is so much more than what we are reading about in our current curriculum, which was probably overwhelmingly designed, written, and shaped by white men in power, because they still are the majority of people in Congress, and they approve what gets classified as the kind of core curriculum that students need to learn. We take that as normal, but culture can disrupt that, right? Remember that when I was growing up, most Americans were still against gay marriage. And then you had Ellen on TV, and you had Will and Grace, and stories began to normalize the white queer experience, because it was mostly white queer people on TV. But then you had marriage get legalized, and you know, there was once an era when people thought that chastity belts were normal. So I think that culture is so critical, and storytelling, but also in sharing that there's these other realities that can exist. That's why I love people like Octavia Butler, and just that the ability for us to imagine another world is really like where it starts, and that's why I think storytellers and artists are so critical, because and even, you know, Black Panther. In Black Panther, it was neither pre-colonial nor post-colonial, right? It was a place where the white colonial powers had not even touched it. So I think that that's the kind of thing that we need now, is to be able to imagine these futures that are not just subscribing to our current reality, because our current reality, you know, like this is like hundreds and hundreds of years of this stuff shaped towards us.
And it's creating a competition, if you will, for who gets because there's only so much pie, right? So if you own more of the pie, then you have more power.
Yeah.
So we're all kind of pitted against each other.
Yeah.
Even though we don't necessarily need to be, even if we're on the same side. I mean, I'm even seeing it in the women's movement. And so one thing that I've been wondering about is, how do you build bridges? How do you build trust? If your intentions are good, but you just don't really understand yet where someone else is coming from or what their lived experience has been, because you've had your own lived experience. Mm-hmm. And how do you make it a two-way street?
Mm-hmm. Well, you listen.
Yeah.
I mean, that's right. And I don't think there are any prescribed ways, except there are kind of wise trends, let's say. Okay, so if you are in a group and you have more power, perhaps for some reason, whatever it is, than the other folks in the group, just remember to listen as much as you talk, all right? And if you have less power, remember to talk as much as you listen, which can be just as hard because you're used to hiding, right? So just simple rules of balance and democracy and circles instead of hierarchy, just minute by minute, day by day, because the means are the ends, actually. I mean, you know, Marx and Engels were very nice guys, and they also were inspired by the Iroquois Confederacy, incidentally, that's right. Wow. But they made one big mistake, which was to say that the ends justify the means. And that's not true. The means we choose dictate the ends we get.
That's right, yeah.
Have you always known this? Or did you have to learn it the hard way?
Well, I had to learn it the hard way, but I had some lucky breaks in my life, big time, before, besides being in a family that wasn't hungry and that, were white people, even if we were in a house trailer, you know what I mean? So, but one of the most important breaks was I didn't go to school until I was about 10. Because we were in a house trailer going back and forth, and so, right. And I think I missed a lot of brainwashing that way.
Wow, that's
right.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I had another break, which was my father was in a kind of small show business in Michigan, and the bands came through, and I'm sorry to say they were either all white or all black.
Wow.
But there were all black bands. Right? Mm-hmm. And I just remember them the guys being nice to me as a child. Mm. So, I don't know. What happens to you as a child is so important,
so
right?
Important.
It seemed to me.
Yeah.
Then I lived in India when I first got out of college because I was engaged and trying not to get married, so I had to go very far away. And I'm so grateful to India because, not only because I didn't get married, but because I saw the way the rest of the world lived in many cases, the way that we lived. I saw different cultures, and when I came home, I realized there I was living with my sister in the District of Columbia and so on, and everybody around where I lived was white. I thought this is very odd because I've been seeing, it's not that India doesn't have problems of caste and all that, but you see all different kinds of people all the time. I thought I could go snowblind in this place, And I got mad on my own behalf. How dare they tell me who my friends are and where I can live and so on and so on. So, it just, I think I had a lot of luck in my life, right?
Well, what about for you, Fabianna? I mean, when someone comes to you and they say, let's say I came to you, and I say, white girl, I want to help, I want to be part of it, I want to stand beside you and do something, but I don't know where to start. Do you encounter anyone coming to you and saying
all
that?
the time.
Okay,
Yeah.
What do you tell us?
Yeah, so I say first to take the time to get as educated as you can so that you can engage with an understanding of history, and whether that's reading the black feminists like Audre Lorde, or reading James Baldwin or Malcolm X, or Octavia Butler, or just to understand what it means to grow up at the intersection of race and gender. And I think it was really interesting what you were sharing, because when I was growing up, there was no characters on TV that looked like me. I would open books and there was no brown or black characters. There was no dolls that had the skin complexion of my brothers and I. And not just that, the messages I would get in school were so much about, oh, you come, did your family ride on a donkey, or are you, you don't belong here? And that really shaped my sense of myself in a really negative way. Not to mention that, we live in a country where police are shooting young black children and getting away with it. So I think that to know that we still have we're growing up in a country where race is highly impacts people. I mean, right now it's completely in front of us. I think that it's important to be able to first engage in a way that is educated, and I don't like the word ally. I like the word co-conspirator, because I think that it really takes for people to be in the front lines with you, and so one of the things I always encourage white people to do is go to Black Lives Matter rallies. Go, show up. right to, if you, in San Francisco, I mean, come on, the police department here, what they've done, like with how they've killed people of color. They killed a Latino guy, 57 shots, who was just eating his burrito. I think to really get engaged in situations where people of color are at the front lines, or, you know, engaging like in Standing Rock, but really using your privilege. And I think that Shakti Butler has a really great definition of privilege, which I love, and I'll share it with you, which is that privilege is the level of safety that you can access at any time. And the world is an unsafe place. So for me, as an American, I have a US passport, and I don't worry about getting deported. But I have a lot of friends who are undocumented, and so I have American privilege. I have cisgender privilege. But when I'm walking down the street by myself, a male-bodied person has more privilege than me. And I have more privilege driving and getting pulled over by a cop than a black person does. And so privilege is the recognition of the safety that you can access at any time. And I think that when you consider that whatever rooms that you go into is to understand how much privilege do I have, and how can I yield that to organize people who, from my community, who look and think like me. You know, in my family, my mom was very homophobic, and, you know, I was just like, it turned out me and my brother are both queer, and so I had to be the one to educate my mom, right? And so I think that it's just that we have to take the time to learn, to get uncomfortable, and to allow ourselves to be transformed, but also kind of take an inventory of what are the levers that we can engage in, and then who can we transform? Because, you know, like, I mean, it was white women who voted for Trump. You know what I'm saying? Like, so then I would say to you, you got to go talk to all your white women friends across the entire country, because seriously, you know, what happened?
I don't talk to those women anymore.
but that's what I mean. Like,
yes,
that's,
right.
You know, and even like, I love Alejandra Ocasio. Okay, can we just celebrate her for a second? Alejandra Ocasio. Okay, I love her. And I just like, I think that, especially for those of us who are involved in you know, fighting global warming and addressing the climate chaos, I love that it's a woman of color who is bringing forward the Green New Deal. And what that tells us something we already knew, which is to trust women of color, especially black women, Stacey Abrams, you know? And so I feel like that's a very concrete thing to do, especially coming up for the 2020 stuff, is to get, trust the leadership of women of color.
Woo. I agree, and also to look at the why of things. You know,
Right.
51% of white women voted for Trump. They were married, mostly, and non-college educated for the most part. And why is that? Okay, whereas 96% of black women voted for Hillary Clinton. I mean, it's a huge difference.
Gosh.
All right, those white women are disproportionate. They are likely to be dependent on their husband's income and on his social identity, and so they are voting for that, all right? And the person who was the smartest about that, I think, this kind of internal occupation, was Harriet Tubman. Because when complimented for freeing thousands of slaves, going into the South and leading out thousands, she always said, I could have freed thousands more if only they knew they were slaves.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
you know, it's
deep.
looking for the why. I worry sometimes when we are told we have to have hard conversations, because it makes it sound negative.
Exactly.
It is not negative. It is infinitely interesting. You don't learn from sameness.
Yes.
You learn from difference. You don't learn while you're talking. You learn while you're listening. Hello? So it's a joy, actually.
It is.
Right.
I love that you say that, because actually, I'm involved in social movements, and I always say, like, why do we use the word struggle? Like, nobody wants to struggle. You know, we that's not sexy. Like, can we, it's not, it just doesn't feel fun. And I feel like right now we're shifting towards embracing joy. And I think transformation is joy. To unlearn white supremacy, to unlearn patriarchy, like the decolonial process is so liberating. It's so freeing because it allows you to connect to other human beings. It allows you to sort of break through and connect as human beings and understand, I can see how you have suffered, and I can see how I can transform that so that we can all be better together. I do think joy, we need like more pleasure-oriented ways of engaging and not just say, oh, it's like we gotta fight, we gotta struggle. It's not, you know,
No.
I don't like it.
And in the service of what you're saying, I would just like to say that I've only figured out in the last few years, although all the old cultures knew this anyway, is that laughter is the only free emotion. You can compel fear, obviously. You can also compel love if you are dependent for long enough. You enmesh with your captor in order to survive, right? But laughter happens when you learn something, when you think of something, right, you know, when you say, and old cultures, especially Native American cultures, have a spirit of laughter, who is neither male nor female, who symbolizes breaking into the unknown. They say laughter breaks into the unknown, that if you can't laugh, you can't pray. So I would just submit that if you never go anyplace where you can't laugh, all right, including church or synagogue or mosque or whatever, if you kind of use laughter as the degree of laughter as a proof of freedom, it's not bad, right? Right. Okay. It's a kind of daily guide, I would suggest. Right?
I love it. Yeah.
It feels really good.
Yeah. I laugh whenever I have an orgasm, and I play with my toy. I laugh a lot.
Okay, I rest my case.
It's just like, yay!
But do you have an orgasm whenever you laugh? That's really the question.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Didn't that feel good? No, I think it's
No,
so...
but
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just thinking about Albert Einstein, who could not possibly have said all the things he's supposed to have said, but nonetheless, he said that when he was shaving, he had to be very careful because if he thought of a new idea, he laughed and cut himself. Okay, so when you think of something new, when you understand something, you laugh.
Yeah.
And you know, and where is that in our guidance or lessons or something, right?
Yeah.
I think that is what I would probably put on my beads at your fundraiser. Laugh. Gosh, where do we go after orgasms? I'm still stuck on that.
I don't know, but we don't go anyplace without them. I just
Just like a quick story is that
Go ahead.
how I first learned about you is because my mom had a whole collection of books because my mom moved here in 1968. And so she she caught a certain part, but she didn't speak English, so she would just, and my mom worked around UC Berkeley in restaurants and all that, and so she would save all the handouts. And as a kid, I would look in her boxes and I found Our Bodies, Ourselves. And I was like, what is this? You know, it was like the first time, because my mom would never talk to me like about anything related to my body. But it was so amazing that she actually had resources that she exposed me to, even if she didn't fully understand, but you could see all the pictures. And that was the first time that I was like, whoa, like I had a map, I had a diagram to what my body was. And it's so critical just that existed in a way that was tangible, that could just, accidentally land, in my bedroom. That's what my mom would do. She would just like leave stuff that I could read. But that's where I first, in these collections of like flyers and all that, that's where I first saw your name, and I was probably like 8 or 9 years old. But that, just that it really, for me, it is, and why I actually talk about orgasm all the time. If you see my Instagram, I talk about it openly because I think that the reason I had an abortion was because I didn't have agency to really tap into my joy and my body. And so I didn't have the tools to negotiate because I didn't want to have a baby. I wanted to have sex. And if I knew how to embrace my own joy and I had the tools for that in a culture that didn't shame me, then I would not have gotten pregnant. And so for me, I think that I love to talk about sexual pleasure and sexual freedom because I think it's very core to our liberation, and it's actually, you all were fighting for that, we're still fighting for that, but I feel like it's very connected, and I don't think it's just about abortion. I think it's fundamentally about the freedom to live our fullest selves in our bodies and tap into our joy and make decisions about our bodies as we see fit.
Right, and I would say when every once in a while I'm talking to an audience that's mostly men, so I try to say to them, listen, if you think submission is great, you are so missing cooperation. You don't know, forget about it. And also that the gender roles shorten the lives of the, white cis men, whatever, who are imposing the gender roles. If we once at Ms. Magazine sort of backed out of the statistics as to why men die, everything that might be attributable to the masculine role, deaths from violence, from speeding, from tension-related diseases, and all that, okay? Yeah. And men lived 5 years longer. This is not a bad offer that, we can offer you 5 more years of life. And a couple of days ago, I noticed that the American Psychological Association ruled that masculinity was a danger to, right. This is big, that they said
toxic masculinity was the danger to society. Yeah.
And to men. It was a danger to men and boys.
Yep.
And toxic masculinity is actually a danger to women as well.
It's to the world. It's actually a danger to the world.
Did they mention that?
Because I just, this is something, as you keep saying, that benefits everybody. And if when we talk about, white cis men and so, yes, there's privilege there, but there is also a prison. Okay, the prison may have wall-to-wall carpeting and people to serve you coffee, but it is still a fucking prison, and get out of there.
It is. I agree. It's a prison. That's a great analogy.
I wish that I could cite the source for this information, but someone did tell me the other day that it has been proven through studies that men who do more housework are less violent and live happier lives. So just add that to the collection of reasons why.
Right. And violence against women is the biggest indicator of all other violence. Not because female life is any more important than male life, it is not, but because it's what we see first in our families and our neighborhoods. It convinces us that this is a normal part of life. And violence against women, which is now so extreme in all of its forms, that there are fewer females on Earth than males for the first time that we are aware of. And it is a bigger indicator of violence inside a country or a country's willingness to use military violence than poverty, than religion, than access to natural resources, or democracy itself, because it normalizes domination and violence. So all this is connected.
Absolutely. We saw that a lot of the mass shooters, the white mass shooters, have histories of domestic violence, and if they would have been,
and all the mass shooters are men, white, and not poor. So if they were Puerto Rican, we'd be hearing about it. Why do we not see them characterized?
I know.
It's because they are the people who have been raised through actually no fault of theirs. They got born into a system that tells them that they have a right to dominate and control other people. And when they can't do it, then they turn to violence. Even mostly, I mean, there's no other gain here except control, because most of them kill themselves afterwards. So it is so destructive to everyone that I hope we see our enlightened self-interest in it universally and not chopped up into groups.
And what I find just like enraging is that we have the data that shows that mass shooters are really that's the terrorist threat, and we are fighting over money going to a wall, and so it's just and what's happening to especially mothers at the border. To me, that 80% of women who are crossing the border are sexually assaulted on the journey, and so we're essentially using resources to degrade, incarcerate. And meanwhile, there's no consequence. There's no kind of shift. When a plane crashes, the federal aviation people, they try to study it back and forth so that it never happens again in that form. And yet the way these shootings one after another, and you have these kids, these white kids on television who are begging adults to do something. It's just so outrageous to me that we have these elected men in power and that they're the heads of these gun companies, and what they are allowed to do. That is privilege, just straight up in front of us, that despite, children, despite the parents who are out in front, we see the data over and over again. Nothing. There's no change to it. And on the contrary, our national resources, our tax dollars, end up going just so misdirected. It's frustrating because it doesn't have to be this way. Yeah.
Back to transformational change,
yes.
Right? It's time, people. Wow. Like the pendulum of orgasms to gun violence.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to find my notes because in the opening, here we go, it's right in front of me. In the opening of your book of essays, Emma Watson writes, "I have come to believe it is through radical feminism and the radical nature of Gloria's message that the job will get done." Do you consider yourself a radical? Do you, Favianna?
Totally.
Yes, because radical actually has wrongly been interpreted as connected to violence or something. It literally means going to the root of a problem. And that is, I think, what we are trying to do, because, the ability to control our own bodies is uprooting the problem.
What I love to talk about is the radical imagination, that our ability to imagine another kind of world allows us to actually work towards that world. And absolutely, I'm completely a radical because I want another worldview. I think that we can access it, I can imagine it, and so I believe that what we have right now is absolutely not. It's destructive.
And if your imagination and your hopes, on mine too, and yours and everybody's, were not already real within us, we couldn't even hope them.
Right.
So we have the vision.
Yes, agreed.
I think it's time for me to get to the audience questions. This is so exciting and so weird that we just spent an hour talking. It just flew right by, didn't it?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. We didn't even get to talk about Me Too.
Oh my gosh, I didn't
We want to spend a minute on that. Yes, we do. There was a yes from out there. All right, let's go for it. Sherilyn says I can go for it. All right. Well, let's talk about Me Too. How do we make this a movement, not a moment?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is really the question. How do we stop this bad behavior? How do we not just, stop in our tracks of having all these stories out there where, we know we're not alone. We know that this bad behavior is happening. So where do we go from here?
Well, so first, Me Too movement, a term coined by Tarana Burke and popularized by Alyssa Milano. What I love about Me Too, and Tarana is my friend, and I love how she has really shifted the conversation to center survivors and to believe survivors. So as somebody who works in the realm of culture, I can tell you that culture moves faster than politics, and culture usually happens 10 to 15 years before policy change. Policy is the last manifestation of an idea that's time has come. But the idea has to exist first. Behavior has to begin to change. Culture is changing. I mean, Harvey Weinstein, October 2017, Time's Up was, and this was around the sort of popularization of Me Too. Within a year, you had the moments at the Oscars. You had people like Rachel DeHollander speak out against Larry Nassar. And one story, it takes one story. I think this is what's so powerful, is that Rachel DeHollander then led to over 250 stories about Larry Nassar. You had, male chefs in the industry go down. You had TV commentators go down. It's like it's a domino effect, really. What it's doing, it's normalizing our ability to believe survivors. And that's the shift. That's such an important shift, because even the fact that Christine Blasey Ford spoke in front of Congress is a consequence of Me Too. So even though these white congressmen, literally they have their head in the sand, culture has changed, and it's just a matter of time for politics to change. And I know, and politics moves so slow. That's the thing. But culture has shifted, and we're not going back. On the contrary, I was actually just on a panel with Tarana, and we were saying we're at a point now where we have the language. We have the language to be able to say survivor justice, I believe you, and it's no longer going to be tolerated. I mean, people are getting their awards yanked. There's consequences. But what's next is that we need to now show the culture of what we want. We can't just be about the no, we have to be about the yes, which then opens the conversation to things like consent, affirmative yeses, and I think that that's the speed that culture moves at, which is that it's going to be constant, and I feel like, 8 to 10 years from now, we're gonna see the laws change, but people have moved, and it's already shifting, and I don't see us as going back. And so I actually don't think it's a moment. I think it's a wave, it's a shift, it's a tidal shift, it's a tectonic shift, actually. And it's really now, how do we begin to create more safe spaces for survivors, but also, and I see this all the time. I go to a lot of feminist conferences and all these racial justice gatherings. The number one thing that people are talking about, especially straight people, they're saying that a lot of marriages are they're talking about Me Too, and there's a lot of tension because now, mostly men need to figure out how to act. And who's going, and the thing is if we turn on the TV today, it's not like you know how to act by watching TV. So there has to be a whole output of ways to engage now in this new reality. And that to me is such a juicy thing. Imagine, no, I'm serious. We're in the moment where we have to reinvent masculinity in a way. I think that's such a great opportunity. So, and that's because of Me Too. Me Too did that. So I feel like we're just seeing the beginning of it.
Did you want to add anything?
Well, no, yes, I just want to add a big yes to everything you just said.
Yes.
One of the things that I think I see helping men to understand is men who have been in prison and in the absence of women have been treated as women. Mm-hmm. So sometimes when I'm someplace speaking, somebody who has been imprisoned will come and tell me, a man, what happened to them, the rape, the sexual assault, the sexual servitude, and so on. That connection hasn't been made yet. I think for those men to talk to other men will help everybody understand that our bodies belong to us, that body invasion is actually more traumatic demonstrably traumatic than being beaten or hit on the outside, that anything that invades your mouth, any of your, is way, way more traumatic. So we need to express this in ways that people can hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that's totally, incarcerated people face like extremely high levels of sexual abuse, and they're predominantly Black and brown people who are in our prison system, just like immigrant women, immigrant women in the fields or in domestic work or in hotels face super high rates of sexual assault and harassment. And that's why I think it was very meaningful for the women of Time's Up to unite with farm workers and to say this is something that needs to shift. But I do think that it has to be accessible to everyone, to those who are in the most vulnerable spaces need to be able to benefit from the shift that's happening, and I think that there's definitely work to be done in that area.
Well, before we get to the audience questions, let me ask you this. What, if it's even possible to answer this question, I always like to throw one of these out there. Over all the time and all the work that each of you have done, is there a key learning or takeaway that we could share with everyone here that says that you could say with certainty, like, this is how change happens. Nothing happens without this. Or an example of when you finally figured out that if you just did fill in the blank, that you would see change happen. Is that an impossible question?
That's really hard. I would just say, thematically, I think what we have been saying is that change is like a tree. It grows from the bottom up. It does not grow from the top down, right? And we spend a lot of time looking up here at, all the leaders who are fucking up and wondering, and we get a case of the shoulds. What should I do? As opposed to looking at each other and saying, I'm going to do everything I can. Whatever turns up every day, and also, more long-term things, absolutely. But I am just going to do everything I can from the bottom up, and I'm not going to wait for the shoulds, and I'm not going to, we're going to change that, yes. But the tree image I find helpful.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yes, thank you.
I would say that we can't shift culture without artists, that we need to include artists. Artists are the architects of change. Whether it was, Nina Simone or Langston Hughes or Keith Haring or the artists who helped end apartheid in South Africa or the artists who helped make the AIDS quilt. Artists are so crucial to how we can change narratives, and I think sometimes we think, oh yeah, art is cute, art is nice, art is decoration, but art is actually crucial to how we make social change, and I would love to see more artists be included, musicians and writers and comic book and storytellers, because I think that human beings understand the world through science and through art. We've been drawing as long as we've been gathering around the fire, and that we need artists now because the politicians their imagination is very limited. We need the artists to help guide us into the future.
Yeah, it's not a nice to have. It's a must have.
Yeah.
Yeah, schools. Who's in charge of the schools here? Okay. All right, on to audience questions. First of all, I just have to say thank you for all of these amazing questions. I'm just gonna ask them until I'm told to stop because there's not a dud in here, let's just put it that way.
And we will learn from them even if we don't answer them. We will, the two of us will read them.
Totally.
Yes. Okay, and really most of these are for both of you. So let's start with, how do we balance compassion and love with anger and bitterness in the current political climate?
Well, anger is an energy cell. It's precious.
Yeah.
Bitterness is another question, I think, because it's resentment. It's like anger in a sealed bottle, So I would say anger is precious and very important, and not to be put down in any way. Compassion, obviously, that's crucial. I would say empathy is the crucial thing. And the one thing that worries me, I mean, a lot of things worry, but anyway, that we are spending so much time looking at screens, whether it's the phone or the computer, or whatever it is, on our wrist right now, right? And so I asked my friendly neurologist if we could experience empathy on a page, or as much as I love books, okay, on a page or a screen, and she said no, actually. That oxytocin, the hormone that allows us to feel what someone else is feeling, is only generated when we are together. So if male or female holds a baby, we are flooded with oxytocin. If we see a horrific accident right here, even if we don't know the person, we're flooded with oxytocin. So I would just say we need to be aware of how much we need to spend at least as much time together as we are now, and able to touch and use and you in the audience here in the, liberated state of San Francisco, right?
Republic of San Francisco.
The People's Republic of San Francisco. So if we can just remember to spend as much time with each other as we spend with the screen, I think that will help a lot.
Yeah. Okay. I can feel it flowing. Are you feeling the oxytocin flowing? Yeah. It's not the same as OxyContin. Okay. It's better. Can you speak to feminism being used as marketing?
Well, I think we know it when we see it, but I just want to say that there are some people that when they're on your side, you're winning.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I agree. Ditto to that.
Come aboard, everybody.
Well, that's because things are getting normalized.
Yeah.
Ideas like when you have the commercial, when I was getting my period, I was told to wrap my pad in 20 or 30 toilet paper rolls because nobody wanted to see my blood. Nobody even talked about blood. But now you have commercials by pad companies that are celebrating a period. That's a culture shift. So I think that when corporations make it popular, it's that we've reached another moment in the culture, which means we just have to keep pushing, right? We have to push for pads to be distributed freely in prisons and in schools, So we have to keep pushing.
No, it's interesting. Menstruation has come out of the closet, so to speak.
I know, right? Totally.
And it's funny you mention it, because the one thing in this book that probably has been the most around and just persisted is a little essay called "If Men Could Menstruate."
Yeah.
So
it's good. Read it.
Because whatever the superior group has is superior. So men, the ideas would brag about it and say, how long and how much and how. And that women could not possibly do mathematics or be astrologers or astronomers without this inbuilt sense of the measure of time and connection to the universe.
One day.
Right. So we can do great things with it too.
What gives you hope for women's freedom now? What gives you hope for women's freedom?
Oh, well, I have to say that young women do, totally, and young men too. Right. Yeah. I have this weird feeling when I'm wandering around the country, which is I just had to wait for some of my friends to be born.
That's great. Yeah. Well, what gives me hope is there's a whole community of trans women and non-binary people and trans men that are really shifting the conversation on gender and are helping us think about gender in an entirely different way. I have a lot of non-binary friends, and I think that it's just important to know that even the way that we talk is very constructed, and that when we have disruptions in this, and we really have, for the first time in the last 10 years, like people like Laverne Cox on television and Orange is the New Black, or you have trans women who have been elected to Congress for the first time, that it really allows us to understand that gender is not a binary, and that we can have such a more expansive conversation around a spectrum, not a binary. And that gets me excited, especially with like young people. I agree, young people. I mean, young people, they are just like, their gender expression is so complicated and non-binary and like vast. And I just am like, gosh, young people, you guys are just like killing it. You know what I mean? Like you're just like taking it. I mean, I was in the generation that barely had gay-straight alliances, and now, we have LGBTQIA+, so I just feel like that to me, when there's complexity in the experience, I love that. I feel like what it does, it increases our visibility, our complexity, and it actually brings so much more nuance to our conversation, and that's what, to me, is very exciting, because it helps us think in an expansive way.
No, sometimes I think that the whole world is divided into two kinds of people, those who divide everything into two and those who don't.
Yeah.
Wait, what?
I don't really mean that. But it's also helpful to remember that the whole dividing into two thing is new. That the people who lived here, again, before Europeans showed up, probably,
it's colonial.
Yeah, didn't have gendered pronouns and didn't divide everything into two, and
Right.
So it's not
I
inevitable.
Feel like the binary
it's not inevitable.
Yeah, the binary is the enemy of everything. It's the binary of everything. Like when people say, oh, it's just black and white. No, that's not. I feel like binaries are actually not even natural. So it's about just like the planet is biodiverse, our experiences are very, complicated. So I love this whole, reference that no binaries.
Check. What advice would you give teen activists about being the most effective in their efforts?
I would say just to not give a fuck about what adults think, because adults have been more conditioned than you, and I just love the teens from This Is 0 Hour who have sued their governments because of climate change. I love Greta Thunberg, who's 16, and she's like, fuck you, I'm not going to school. You guys, the house is burning, and you adults need to do something about it. So I'm just very hopeful. I mean, the kids from March for Our Lives, Emma Gonzalez, I don't know if you read her article in Teen Vogue, but she was basically just shave your head, because you will not worry about how you look if you just shave your head. That's the number one advice she gave, and I was like, go Emma! So I feel to be yourself and to actually embrace your most, when you're a teenager, you just absolutely are in your most experimental, expressive phase, and just to embrace it, and as many adults as you can piss off, do it.
As the mother of two teens, I have mixed feelings.
Well, you could also say, if you're a teenager and you're going to some terrific event that is only teenagers, take an old person with you.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Educate an old person, right?
There's some more intersectionality for you.
Be intergenerational.
Yeah, we need age intersectionality too, and
totally.
if I am going, or an older person is going to someplace that is only older people, take a teenager with you. Because
totally.
age is a ridiculous kind of segregation too.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We as older people are kind of useful because we remember when it was worse, so we have hope. And younger people are really useful because they don't remember when it was worse, and they're mad as hell at what's going on right now.
Totally.
So I would say that age segregation is as bad as any other form of segregation.
Yeah.
100%. Do you think of yourself as an older person?
I'm trying to. I tell everybody.
When does that happen?
I don't. You know, the secret of getting older is you're always the same person inside there. You know, you're learning and you're changing, but you're still the same person. So I walk around telling everyone that I'm 84 and I'm about to be 85, you know, because...
Next month.
Because I'm trying to make it real to myself. I was thinking of doing a stand-up comedy act because...
Could I do it with you?
I thought I had my first line. You want to hear my first line?
Yes.
Okay. At my age, most people are dead.
I think you have a winner.
I don't know if that will fly or not, but but it's true. And if you so you know, we're all in this life cycle. I just want to say to you from the bottom of my heart, two things. One, you don't change. You are, you come into the world as a unique human being, a combination of heredity and environment that has never happened before, could never happen again, right? And you remain that with adding all kinds of experiences and so on. We mystify age, and we also have the leftover kind of corporate idea that you're supposed to retire. People, what, am I going to retire? Are you kidding me? I mean, the word still, occurs now in people's questions of me. Oh, you're still traveling. So I just would make a plea for age diversity and for understanding that we are each unique. If we're 6 years old or 60 or whatever it is, we're that unique person who came into the world and is just adding experience and understandings, right? Mm-hmm. And also, one more thing I have to say. Remember how you were kind of free before you were 10 or so, 11, and before hormones arrived and gender roles arrived to fight and stuff like that? Okay, that happens at the other end of life, too.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And it is great, because all that part of your brain that was reliably dedicated to sex for the whole middle part of life is now free for other things,
Good to know.
Yeah. Great to know.
Favianna. Okay, this seems like a great audience question to end on. When do you feel most powerful?
You guys already know what I'm going to say. I really do feel most powerful when I'm giving myself an orgasm with my sex toy, because I really do. I really do. I feel that I was blessed with having a body part that has 8,000 nerve endings. It's the body part with the most nerve endings that exists. And I feel like I'm unlearning so many things and just like tapping into my power, my joy, and connecting to nature. I feel connected to the world. I feel connected to humanity. Seriously, I do. And I feel that I can love myself, that I don't need that I can give myself a moment of joy and reflection and like really true love. For someone, it took me like 30 years to do that, to like actually learn how to love my body and celebrate it, because all those messages that were negative really were in my imagination, and so to get rid of them was so liberating. So that moment to me when I'm like, hells yeah, like, I can love myself, celebrate myself, and it feels like awesome. And then I can I have so much confidence after that. I have my confidence, I feel happy, I feel excited, less stressed. And I'm like, hells yeah, like let's, take down patriarchy now.
I think it used to be a medical treatment.
Yeah,
So
it was.
there you go.
It was
The
actually.
vibrator play.
That's right.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, so Gloria, top that.
When do I feel the most powerful? Give me your hand. When I'm listening to you. Okay.
All right. I get to ask one last very pragmatic question, which is, what is one outrageous act our guests here tonight can try at home?
No, I'm not going to.
Or yeah, but why not? Do that too. But something else.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Another practice I have, which is to really learn how to grow a plant. To really connect with, that how much millennials love their plants, and it's real, because they're growing up in this age where they don't have access to nature, but I feel like when you get to cultivate a plant, which it's like a mirror, you give it water and then it grows for you, and then little scales might get on it, but you can pick them off, and it's kind of metaphoric for picking off all the parasites in your life, and then you give it sun. And then if you don't pay attention to it, if you don't pay attention to a fern, it starts getting all diva on you. So I think that when you really learn to care for a plant, it's a really good moment for you to connect with another species. Plants terraform the planet, and we breathe because of plants. And I love that when people invest energy into something that they can nourish and nurture, it's a good metaphor for your self-care, because you're oh, I water this, I care for it, I talk to it, I make sure and open the curtain so that it can have sun. That's you. So I think that's a good practice. I would encourage everyone do it, and then begin your own little plant family, and it's incredibly grounding, but also a way to reduce your stress.
Well, I don't know if I can think of any one thing, but I think you can think of any one thing, I mean, doing something outrageous can be as simple as saying, pick it up yourself,
Yes, love it.
Or just, I don't know, because I always used to end, that's how it got its title, this book, wherever I was, by saying, okay, in the next 24 hours, so okay, I'll just say this, okay, in the next 24 hours, just promise me that you're going to do one outrageous thing in the cause of social justice and change and so on. And it can be as simple as saying, pick it up yourself. Or it can be as complicated as saying, I'm running for office, or buying a vibrator, or actually telling the truth in a situation in which you haven't been able to, or, I do not know, But the idea is that if each of you here, if we all promise each other, me too, I will promise to do one outrageous thing in the cause of social justice in the next 24 hours, I can promise you two things. One is that by the day after that, the world will be better. Mm-hmm. And the other is you will have such a good time.
Yes. Yes. Totally.
That you will never again get up.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank you, thank you everyone for coming tonight. I'm Lauren Schiller. Thank you, Gloria Steinem. Thank you, Favianna Rodriguez. for an amazing conversation.